Right, so is Keir Starmer facing a showdown already? It seems he might be, and it's all over his cruel refusal to lift the two-child benefit cap. It seems something is in the offing as a number of Labour MPs look set to join with some opposition parties in challenging against Starmer's penny pinching, which is keeping 250,000 kids who would be otherwise lifted out of poverty with the lifting of this measure very much in poverty. And against a backdrop of investing heavily in defence and a massive military aid package to Ukraine in the last week, any excuses that we have no money for this just isn't washing with a lot of people. But given the size of his majority, can this plot to get this policy overturned work? Or are the optics of voting to literally keep kids in poverty going to be too much of a test for some, not necessarily of Starmer, but of a great many of his brand new MPs not wishing to be damaged by such a thing already? Right, so the two-child benefit cap debate is happening, no matter how many times Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves attempt to slam the door on the matter. Now, discussions have been early days on this. The first I got wind of this was a Twitter thread by LBC's political correspondent Agnes Chambray, which reads, "There are discussions amongst opposition MPs about potentially trying to force a vote on the two-child benefit cap. One independent MP said they are talking to the SNP about this, and a Labour MP suggested there may be movement on this. One SNP MP said their party is working out if they could put down an amendment and that they'd been approached by an independent MP to see about working together. Another of the 9 SNP MPs said they want to hold Labour's feet to the fire on issues like this. The Greens have not been approached by the SNP, but they would work with them on this and are considering doing something themselves in the Commons and want to use their new MPs to change the policy. One Labour MP told me many in their party are raging and that this MP thought many would vote against it if it did come to a vote. But one cabinet minister said that although people in the party don't like it, but there's nothing to be done because of the fiscal rules. I understand there's not been any shift in Labour's position on this as set out during the election. They did of course announce a child poverty strategy during the campaign. Labour obviously have a huge majority, but could this be early sign of the tactics and possible threat by the smaller left parties band together and try and force division within the Labour Party with issues that appeal to its more left-wing MPs? So could this be the first major test of Starmer's massive majority, and if indeed so many Labour MPs are raging about this, will they rebel already in a show of force to Starmer's team that he might have a big majority, but they aren't going to tolerate Tory-like cruelty on something that clearly is affordable if the money can be found for other things? Labour's fiscal rules, and sticking by them after all, is completely arbitrary on their point, since Rachel Reeves simply made them up. Certainly some Labour MPs have already found their voices on this, though of course they come from the left, what few lefties remain in Starmer's regime. Kim Johnson tweeted out as one, for instance, "I have long campaigned against the two-child benefit cap. This policy is cruel, punitive, and is pushing struggling families into further poverty. I am laying an amendment to the King's speech calling for the cap to be scrapped, immediately lifting 250,000 children out of poverty." Others in Labour who have called it out include the likes of Right to Food champion Ian Byrne and Corbyn's Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, but how many more could add their names to that? It's an interesting claim that Agnes Chambray made, I thought, because on one hand, doing away with such a nasty policy is absolutely the sort of thing you would expect a Labour government to do. Unfortunately, this Starmer and Reeves-led government is a more Tory-like venture than we've seen from Labour in some time. Far more so than we saw under Gordon Brown, I would argue. Definitely more so than Ed Miliband, despite him being part of this government now. We've not seen a Labour Party this close to being another blatant Tory party since the worst excesses of Blair himself, and Starmer may just surpass that. Add to that line of thinking the fact so many who are now Labour MPs were picked because they were Starmer's sort, weren't they? Imposed wherever to get them imposed into Parliament because they would ostensibly do precisely what they were told by Starmer and Reeves, and in theory, in which case you've no chance of inflicting defeats on Starmer at all because he's rigged his party that way. Yet still there is the possibility that many of these, despite being hand-picked as loyalists in waiting, will not want to be tarred with having backed something so cruel and punitive and completely out of keeping with what the Labour Party should be about. Of course, the opposite could very well be true as well. They could very much just vote as instructed. But whereas Tory voters might not care largely, right-wing viewpoints on this matter usually a case of blaming the parents and why should we pay for their profligacy, missing the point entirely that it is the child who is innocent, who didn't ask to be born, that is actually punished for it. Labour voters on the whole, think differently. Certainly that was my experience when I was a member of the Labour Party myself. Labour MPs, therefore, who act in such a manner, and it is all a matter of public record of how they vote, of course, are much more likely to be damaged by such conduct than a Tory MP would be. Many Labour MPs who once had massive majorities no longer do anymore. Those who won their seats newly this time around have no track record for defending their seat, whatever majority they might have. And if Labour conduct themselves as badly as the Tories have on various policy points, not only something like this, those new majorities may not be worth an awful lot. So they have a lot to think about between party loyalty and the good of the country. And of course there is Starmer's mantra of country before party. So these Labour MPs ought to prove that, therefore. So they can soon toss that in the face of any whips who try and put the hard word down on them. This would fundamentally be a rather good test then to see which Labour MPs these days do that and which clearly don't. And I'd be more than happy to name and shame them. Whilst a significant chunk of Labour MPs would be required to pull this off, though, there's no overstating that. And whilst Kim Johnson is putting an amendment down for the King's speech on the 17th of this month on this, the conversation began on the opposition benches. An independent having a chat with the SNP for one, though that individual is not named. There are only 6 independents to choose from. Now the SNP, despite having been handed a massive defeat at the hands of Labour in Scotland as far as Westminster is concerned, are still in charge at Holyrood, and in that capacity, that party up in Scotland, they ameliorate the 2-child benefit cap already. They've stepped up to ensure that kids in Scotland don't go hungry because they happen to have been third born. Seems logical, therefore, that they would vote to end the policy. I thought it interesting that the Greens had not been approached, though, according to that tweet by Agnes Chambray, but were possibly planning their own move. At least that is what we're being told, though would very much support any such move any other party would bring forward. That much is clear from their manifesto, of course. Scrapping the 2-child benefit cap is something they as a party are very much committed to and would vote accordingly. Of course they would, be it by their own measures or supporting the actions of others in Parliament pushing to do likewise. There's a Byline Times article out today, actually, interviewing Green co-leader and new MP for Bristol Central, Carla Denyer, and the Green MP for North Herefordshire, Ellie Chowns, and they very much reiterated as much. Key areas of focus for the party, Denyer and Chowns said, was stopping new oil and gas projects like the Rosebank fields, mandating solar panels on new builds, lifting the 2-child benefit cap, and addressing river pollution and environmental protection. The pair also told Byline Times that there's a possibility of a new left-wing caucus emerging in Parliament via the Green New Deal Rising Group, which helped get them elected. 11 of the left-wing group's 15 candidates they backed were elected. While admitting it was definitely time for the Conservatives to go, Denyer's optimism that things would change under Labour was somewhat tempered by how quickly they're abandoning policies before even getting into power. I think there's been a legitimate fear from many voters that if they're like that in opposition, what would they be like in government? I certainly agree with Denyer there, but then I am biased. Ultimately, though, however this reckoning comes about, and whatever it manages to achieve, it will expose a lot of MPs and will expose Starmer's Labour as equally cruel to the Tories by not just pledging to abolish what is clearly in the interest of the country, in the interest of standing up for the next generation, but by reinforcing that when put to a vote. As politically damaging as this might be, it might not even need to actually succeed. A defeat for Starmer would certainly put a shot across his bows that his supermajority, depending on issue, is still beatable. But equally, the political fallout might prompt a U-turn on it anyway. So the mere act of bringing this issue up and taking it to a vote might still deliver the desired objective. The money is there to do this with, ultimately. The money is always there. It is always political choice that comes down to whether something is backed or not, and it is the choice of Starmer and Reeves, both parents themselves incidentally, which makes this all the more sickening that they won't do this already, to not deliver it. Just to illustrate that point further, here's a video recommendation where I went into the costing of lifting the 2-child benefit cap. Yet Starmer has found enough money to put together a military aid package for Ukraine, again making clear this is very much all about choice when it comes down to it. And what an appalling choice to have made, not only to contribute to an ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia by sending more weapons, but to do so while saying our own kids living in poverty here in the UK must continue to go without at the same time. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.